how are you doing?
Not too well. My boyfriend is dead and I'm staring at his corpse. So things could be better.
I know this sucks, but try to look on the bright side. This is a really good opportunity for character development.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. Death is a really handy way to propel a narrative. It comes in handy in all sorts of ways. Maybe TL's death compels you to go out and find the murderer. Or maybe you go out and find the real love of your life while overcoming the trial of having lost the person you thought was the love of your life.
This is an opportunity for me to grow as a person and to improve myself after a reasonable mourning period.
That's probably at least 6 months.
After a semi-reasonable mourning period.
That's the spirit.
Thanks, Amy, for showing me how death can be used for character development.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Now, in TL's will, he did ask that the officiant read his favorite passage of scripture at his funeral, so I will begin that now. Supercalifragilistic. My ex be on some shit. Superman.
Did he say that TL wanted him to read this passage?
I think so. It's such an odd request.
It doesn't seem appropriate.
I ain't ever knew ya. Probably still ran through him though. Oh wait. I do know you're You talking about Tracy. Certainly not from a priest, no.
Anyway, I did have a question about that character development thing that you were saying. So would a good example of character development in this scenario be me becoming more tolerant as a person? I was pretty rude and dismissive toward TL, sometimes even caught on film, such as in a previous video linked up there.
Oh, definitely, yes. See, when a character dies, the development is for those who are left behind. Some of those who pass away may want to carry on the legacy of the deceased, while others may want to avenge the person who died. Or perhaps those who are left behind want to better themselves in honor of the person who passed away.
But if he ever comes back to life, all of that character development is lost?
Right you are, at least in most cases. I mean, what would be the point of this entire ceremony if TL just came back to life right now? Would you remain inspired to be a better person, or would you feel as if all of that inspiration and character development were kind of meaningless and empty?
True. I hardly want to better myself right now as it is, and I definitely wouldn't want to if he were still alive. This has really been going on for some time.
Then I'm out the back door. Lil Pillsbury, I stack dough. I mean, it has to end soon. Audience retention is a pretty big deal on YouTube. And now for his second request, that his perfect Chipotle burrito order be placed on his chest. To his specifications, we have acquired a double-wrapped burrito with half and half beans, white rice, sofritas, extra veggies, and corn. No guac? It's a little cheap. But this burrito order shall be placed on the deceased chest. And for his third and final request, I shall read a YouTube comment from his most popular video, 10 Reasons Not.
Oh God, he loved these. It used to make him laugh all the time that people would be commenting on this video as if it were serious and just crack him up. It used to really make him laugh when people would praise Terry Pratchett's satire in the comments, while simultaneously commenting that the video itself was definitely legitimate and was in no way satirical at all, despite also being released on April Fool's Day and being released by somebody who's very obviously a massive Discworld fan. He loved those comments so much. Hard to believe that there are people in the world who are that stupid. It's a YouTube comment section, so it is predominantly operated by idiots. Feel free to prove me wrong.
Fair. He's just trying to make money off Terry Pratchett's death. What a cunt. End quote.
I haven't made any money off of any of my videos.
Oh my God,
Yes,
what the?
yes,
Lord
please,
in heaven.
Go away. I have a video to do. I got an idea. I guess I'll just... Okay, I'll just... Funeral's over, I guess. Can't have a funeral without a body. We're gonna talk about resurrection. But first, I'm gonna smash this burrito.
I'm about to go off like a weapon. Fuel to the top, got a filled up engine. In my thoughts, obsession. I will not stop, no, I'm never second guessing. I got a God complex. Haters love to hate, but I never feel pressed. Got a lot on my plate, but I never get stressed.
Resurrection's first known recurrence, meaning the first time that it was a theme, was in ancient Egypt. Yeah, they do get all of the cool stuff. Specifically, it was around the cult of Osiris. Let's talk a little bit about that. Who was Osiris? What was this cult? And most importantly, why was this cult so popular? Osiris is a god most known for making his sister his wife. Okay, that's not actually what he's most known for, but I just wanted to mention that it was getting pretty Ohio up in ancient Egypt. Suba, do you have to do that right now? Osiris was a king among gods. One day during a banquet, the deity Set brought forth a coffin and set it in front of him. He set forth a challenge to everybody in the banquet.
Oh, hey, that's a pretty nice coffin. So if I get in there and I fit perfectly, I get to keep this thing for free. My staff's so bendy. It happens to the best of us. And you're not gonna close the lid. Why does this coffin have a lock on it? All right, I'll get in. Here, hold my bendy staff. Sorry. Oh, right. So Osiris climbed into the coffin and Set shut the lid on him. Osiris had failed Set's set challenge that Set had set before him at the banquet setting. With Osiris locked in the coffin, Set tossed it into the Nile River, and then Set's sister wife fetched it out of the river and brought him back. Now Set, determined to succeed, went and found the body and cut it up into little pieces. It was a bit of overkill. However, Osiris's sister wife was, I'm gonna keep making that point. But Osiris's sister wife still wasn't going to give up, and so she put Osiris back together with a bunch of bandages. Yeah, she put band-aids and gauze all over him and put him back together, and I guess that worked. And that is the first ever mummy. Osiris went on to be the lord of the underworld, and the cult of Osiris was built around him. The cult spread the idea that by being buried in the same way as Osiris, you could be resurrected and have a life beyond death, just like he did. Now, this whole process was intricate and needed to be exact, and that's why we have mummies. Fascinating stuff, right? But why did the cult gain popularity and why did it spread so far through Egypt? The cult of Osiris spread for a reason, and these beliefs spread for a reason. You'd think that a cult centered around the lord of the underworld wouldn't be all that popular, but it was. And the reason for that is that humans have always been obsessed with these ideas of resurrection, rebirth, reincarnation, you name it. We want to believe that there's something beyond this death. Even if you're not happy with your life right now, there's probably a part of you that really likes the idea of being able to go back and do things correctly or otherwise get a second chance at life and do it right this time. And additionally, there's just this natural fear of death and what lies beyond if anything does. The cult of Osiris is the earliest known iteration of this, but it is far from the last. In fact, today we have plenty of cults and religions that are built around this idea of rebirth, or at the very least, a life after death in some form or fashion. Hell, we even have the rationality cult right now, which is built around this idea of transhumanism and the belief that eventually the AI is going to take our brains and put it in a robot body or whatever the case may be, right? We have this idea that we're not going to actually die and that death isn't permanent. Resurrection appeals to our survival instinct and tells us that there is a chance we could live forever and that we're not going to die. Now, that's an extremely brief history of resurrection, as well as a brief discussion around why resurrection is so popular and why it has always been popular with people. But I want to talk more about resurrection's impact on stories, specifically whether or not it improves or inhibits them. This is Ellie. There are many reasons why I don't like the resurrection trope, but I've spent some time narrowing it down to 3 core reasons why I think the trope makes stories less enjoyable for me. The first one is that resurrection cheapens death. When a character is brought back to life, it makes all of the emotions that not only I felt, but that the characters in the story felt feel worthless or wasted. Was it sensible for me to mourn that character's death? Was it sensible for the other characters in the book to mourn the other one's death? And why should I mourn the next death of a character in the story? What makes the next death different? Why should I believe that character is actually going to stay dead? After I've seen a character in a story resurrected, every character death after that, my first thought is, well, this one's probably gonna get brought back too. Instead of, oh no, I lost this character, even if it's a character that I loved, I just don't really feel a whole lot in those instances. And why should I bother? The thing is, death is a grave consequence. And when you remove the consequence of death, you leave me wondering,
why should I care when another character dies? Death can be a consequence of many things. Sometimes characters die just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Other times they die because they did something noble in a world that punishes nobility. Self-sacrifice is another valid reason why a character dies. My point here is that a story is always going to be better off if a character dies and stays that way, because that leaves the remaining characters to grapple with that death and the consequences therein. It also tells the reader or the viewer that, hey, this setting is really brutal. Characters die because they make these mistakes. It's also a way of saying that, hey, self-sacrifice in this world, it really does have meaning. You're actually dead. So when you make that ultimate sacrifice, there's no coming back from that. You really have to be prepared for the consequence. Now, this next point I did touch on briefly, but I'm just going to revisit it here. It reduces stakes. When you resurrect a character, it reduces the stakes that are brought about by death. When I see characters in a high-stakes situation after I've already seen that resurrection is a significant part of this world, especially if that resurrection is very easy to do, my first thought is usually, I'm not really all that tense, because even if they die, they're probably going to make it out of this alive because someone will come along and bring them back to life. So why should I care and why should I feel tense or anxious in the situation? When you remove the permanence of death, you also remove the need for me to feel any fear. And now on to my third and final reason for hating the resurrection trope. This isn't to say that there aren't other reasons I don't like it, it's just me saying these are the big three. And the third one is one I think a lot of people can agree with, and that is, why not this character? If you brought this character back to life, why can't this one be returned as well? Sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. Sometimes the means of resurrection just wasn't clearly explained, and other times it's just because the author didn't think it through. If you can resurrect the hero, what's to stop people from resurrecting the bad guy once you kill him? Do the heroes of the story also now need to consider the fact that when they kill the bad guy might just be brought back at some point? I also really hate it when they resurrect one character, but then there's another character who can't be resurrected, and the reason given is so weird and arbitrary and made up on the fly that Of course you came up with that because you actually want this character to stay dead, but you brought the other one back, and now there's just an arbitrary reason in your setting that you're bringing up now that explains why this one can't be resurrected the same way. In my opinion, this is one of the really big problems with pants writers, because if you are a plotter instead of a pantser, one of the first things that you're going to want to do if you intend for resurrection to be part of your world is establish those rules of the resurrection so that those who are viewing your story or who are reading it can understand what is at stake here. If you explain these rules clearly, then we know, hey, there's a good chance that if these characters die in this scenario, they're not going to be able to be brought back. Instead of just winging it and every time that a character needs to actually die, you have to come up with some arbitrary reason why the previous means couldn't be used. I'm looking at you, Legend of Vox Machina, because one of my biggest complaints with season 1 is that characters were just being brought back to life over and over again with little to no explanation. And then in this season, we need to have somebody die in a way that they can't be resurrected, and we need a little more clarity around why that is, and they just kind of throw out a couple of random sentences that explain it away, and suddenly we're supposed to just accept that, and it just removed those stakes for me. And I'm also somebody who loves Critical Role, don't get me wrong, I've watched the first season, and so I know behind the scenes why these things worked, but in my opinion, writing this show was an opportunity for them to make things a little more clear, and to even remove some of those resurrection opportunities as opposed to making it even easier to resurrect somebody with just some mud and spit. Yeah. Now, Vox Machina is one example, but I actually want to do a deep dive on a few others. So here is a list of 5 different stories that have resurrection and what I think about them. I'll tell you why I might like resurrection in one story and why I might hate it in another. Let's go ahead and get to that. Now, I have several examples that I want to get through, so I'm going to try to push through them as quickly as possible. Feel free as well to leave your own examples in the comments, or even to reflect on the examples that I provided and tell me whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts on these. And while you're down there, consider liking and subscribing, because both of those things not only help out the channel, but they also help to boost the video and hopefully create a more engaging discussion. I'd love to hear from people who both agree and disagree with me and have an actual discussion around this topic. So liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing, all of those things really help to boost the video, and I greatly appreciate anything that you do in those regards, whether you do all of them or just one. But if you do none, you're dead to my cat. Let's get to these examples, shall we? My first example is Tangled. Yeah, I'm starting off with the Disney princess movie. Nothing is gonna be safe from this. Now, Tangled came very close to becoming one of my favorite films in its category. It could very well have beaten Atlantis and Hunchback and become my #1, but it failed to stick the landing, and the reason that it failed to stick the landing is the resurrection trope. Flynn Rider, better known as Eugene, had a fantastic character arc throughout this movie. He went from being a rapscallion and scallywag to being a heroic and self-sacrificing, all-around fantastic person. It was an excellently written character arc, probably one of the better character arcs that we've seen in this genre. If you have better examples, I would love to hear from you, because in my mind, in this specific category of Disney movies, this is the best character arc that we get. And yet that character arc is thrown away by the movie's ending. Flynn's final act was sacrificing himself, cutting Rapunzel's hair to ensure that not only could she not heal him, but that also her curse was removed. And yeah, he had come to see it as a curse because that is ultimately what it was. It had led to her being used and manipulated all her life. This was Flynn, or Eugene's, final act, and it was beautifully done, and it was the perfect culmination of his character arc throughout the movie. And then magic tears. Yeah, there's really no explanation that I've found that suffices. She just still, I guess, has the power, which means that not only was Flynn's sacrifice worthless anyway because he didn't actually remove her abilities, but then also he did because all of the magic for Mother Gothel started to fade. It doesn't make any sense. So not only does it not make any sense, but it also means that Flynn sacrificed himself for very nearly no reason because she still has the power. It also completely throws the magic of the world and of Rapunzel into disarray and makes nothing make any sense anymore. In a film that otherwise honestly did make at least some degree of sense. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it made sense. It's far more sensible than some Disney films. The point is that Flynn being brought to life not only ruined his character arc, but made me like the movie considerably less. It's not a great film because of how it ends. The ending completely spoils it. Tangled wrapped Flynn up in a nice little bow, and then abruptly, in the last couple minutes of the movie, it takes off that bow, sets it on fire, and throws it into a swamp. Imagine how tragically beautiful the ending of this film would be if Flynn had sacrificed himself and stayed dead, and Rapunzel went on to live her life with her parents and was free of her curse and could just live an ordinary life. I mean, ordinary compared to being locked in a tower. Obviously, being a princess is not really all that ordinary. You have a pretty awesome life from there, which at that point she kind of deserved after everything she'd been through, especially, watching Flynn, the person that she loved and the first real person she loved, die. And maybe she'd go on to love somebody else, who knows, but the point of it is that the movie would have been a more tragically beautiful story if Flynn's sacrifice had actually meant something. And instead, the ending is just this standard happy ending where everybody gets what they want except for Mother Gothel, who turns to dust or whatever and falls. So, Tangled, yeah, terrible use of resurrection. Honestly, movie ruining for me. All right, now let's move on to a resurrection instance that I actually like. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Okay, yeah, I know, Joss Whedon sucks, but we're not talking about Joss Whedon here. We're talking about a show that he happened to be involved with. Joss Whedon can go, you can go sit over there, please. Yep. Yeah. Right over there. Thank you. Okay, Joss Whedon's over there. He's not involved with this. We're just talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So whatever comments you have about Joss Whedon, I don't know. I mean, I guess you can make them because it boosts engagement, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Season 5's finale was meant to be the end of Buffy, both the show itself and the character. Buffy sacrifices herself and she dies. Definitely, unavoidably dies. She's gone. And that was supposed to be the end. And then the series got picked back up again, and they kind of had to bring their titular character back, and they did it through Resurrection. And it is widely touted as one of the better uses of Resurrection out there. Now, it is not perfect, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it is absolutely perfect and there aren't any flaws with it, but it was a good solution, and they did it in the best way that they possibly could. See, after Buffy died, she went to heaven, and she was happy. Compared to what she was going through on Earth, it was a significantly better life. Then she was brought back into this cruel, cruel world that has treated her so poorly all her life, and well, to put it lightly, that really sucks. Additionally, when she was brought back, she was confused and she thought that perhaps she'd been sent to hell or there was some sort of misunderstanding. The whole resurrection was handled very darkly, and you kind of feel badly for Buffy. I think anyone in their right mind will wish that Buffy had stayed dead where she was happy, at least if you care about the character. And that is a really solid use of the resurrection trope. Buffy unhappily came back into this miserable world and in her confusion tried to recreate her own death. That is a pretty high cost to pay for being resurrected, but in addition to that, resurrection had already been established as a big part of this world's setting earlier on. Resurrections had happened in a multitude of ways, some of them even involving the cult of Osiris, or at least mentioning Osiris, and this is just another one of those resurrections. So viewers knew that it was entirely possible for Buffy to be brought back to life. Now, I perused online and found some Reddit comments from people who are a little more ingrained in the Buffy lore than I am, which is to say, if you're ingrained at all, you know a lot more than I do about this. And some people mentioned that one of the reasons why Buffy was able to be resurrected is that her death was mythic instead of ordinary, and that in Buffy's universe there is some contrast between different kinds of deaths. Now, that is information that I have stolen from some random people on the internet. I don't know if it's verifiable or if it's completely accurate, so feel free to correct me or expound on this in the comments if you are a lot more ingrained in Buffy than I am. I've watched it, I liked it, it was all right, it was fine.
It was pretty good. It was all right. It wasn't great, but it was fine.
So Buffy's Resurrection, that gets a thumbs up from me. Now we're going to talk about Resurrection in Harry Potter. Yes, I know. J.K. Rowling also sucks. J.K., you can go and sit over there next to Joss Whedon, please. Yep, right there. That's fine. Yeah. Yep. Say hi to Orson for me. All right, now that she's out of the way, we can go ahead and actually talk about the story here. Now, the death and resurrection of Harry Potter was central to the story's plot. It was foreshadowed really well throughout the series, and if you paid attention, you knew it was something that was probably going to have to happen in order for Voldemort to be destroyed. And yet, I think that Harry Potter's death and resurrection being foreshadowed means that there was an even greater opportunity to subvert that expectation and leave Harry Potter dead. I briefly touched on this idea of leaving Harry Potter dead or just leaving the Chosen One dead in my Let the Chosen One Die video, which you can watch by clicking up there or in the description or somewhere if you're curious. My argument here is that the story of Harry Potter would have been better if Harry Potter had stayed dead. It was set up throughout the series, maybe not even necessarily as intentionally as, that person would have wanted, but it was set up that Neville Longbottom could have been the Chosen One instead of Harry Potter. And honestly, Neville would have been a better one. He was a kinder, gentler, and more loving person who cared a lot more deeply about his friends and the people around him and even just the world than Harry arguably did, because Harry was kind of a jerk for a lot of the story, possibly because he had this bloated head from being the Chosen One, at least in part. Having Harry Potter die just to give Voldemort a false sense of security so that Neville could come in and kill Voldemort himself would have been an absolutely outstanding and unexpected ending, as opposed to having Harry Potter die and be brought back to life as everybody expected was going to happen. So the resurrection was foreshadowed well, we were told it was going to happen, and I don't think that it surprised anybody who read the books, but the question is, did it make the story better than it could have been? And my argument is no, it didn't. The story would have been better if Harry had stayed dead, subverting our expectation that he be brought back to life and allowing somebody else to take up the mantle of Chosen One. All right, I've got two more examples, and this next one I think is going to come as a bit of a surprise. It is Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, which I know is a gigantic mess of a movie that makes absolutely no sense and kind of insults its viewers and anyone's intelligence who watches it, but I do like the way that Resurrection is handled in it. Yeah, I know, that's pretty surprising. It's a giant mess, and I just rewatched it to make sure that I'm not insane for thinking this, because I've always thought it, and upon rewatching it, I still agree the resurrection in this is handled pretty well, despite the fact the movie makes absolutely no sense and is a giant cluster. So why do I think that the resurrection in this is handled well? Let's look at the details. From the very beginning of this movie, it is established that bringing someone back from the dead is extremely challenging. It is something that not anybody can just do, and that you need a team of people and a lot of things in order to accomplish, and even then, the likelihood of succeeding is incredibly low. Resurrection in this is a nigh on impossible task, and the first roughly half of the movie at least is established just setting up how they get to Jack Sparrow and then trying to bring him back to the land of the living. There's also a chance they could just be left there with him in their attempt to go and fetch Jack. The only way that they can get out of that situation is because the Black Pearl is there waiting for them. So they have this crew of people there that can man the ship, and then they have to sail the ship, and there's all this other crazy stuff they have to accomplish just to get back to the land of the living. It is a lot of work to go through just to have a chance at bringing one person back, and you are risking a lot to make that attempt. And additionally, it does a really good job of establishing why Jack Sparrow is the one who needs to be brought back. He's one of the pirate lords, and they need all the pirate lords to complete this ritual that is going to allow them to actually stand a chance against this enemy that they are about to face. I also want to point out too that not everybody wants to bring Jack back, and most people don't even really like him. Even the people who are on this journey are not fond of him. They are doing this because they have to, which really helps to sell the fact that this resurrection, you're not really going to do it for everybody. You're going to do it in very special cases where it is absolutely necessary that this person be returned to life. I'm also going to point out that yes, I know that Barbossa was also resurrected, but his resurrection was very different. He was brought back by Calypso, and she makes it abundantly clear that he is still tied to her, and she can undo that whenever she wants to. So I wouldn't say that Barbossa is necessarily resurrected in the same way that Jack is. He's more of an undead servant. And now for my last example, Game of Thrones. If you legitimately haven't watched Game of Thrones yet, that's pretty shocking to me. If you're somebody who's going to watch it, I'd assume you already would have. But if you really don't want spoilers for this, I guess just skip this section. But this is spoilers for, I think, seasons 5 and 6 and maybe 7. I'm not sure. It's been a while. But I'm talking about the resurrection of Jon Snow. Jon Snow's resurrection was an interesting mix of predictable and
poorly foreshadowed. We all kind of expected him to be brought back to life, but there wasn't actually a good reason to. After his death, there were some discussions online about how it's going to be possible, and most of us came to the consensus that Missandra was going to use her magic from the Lord of Light to bring Jon Snow back to life somehow. And because magic is never really explained all that much in the Game of Thrones world and is meant to be mysterious. The thing with Resurrection is when you leave that mysterious, it opens all sorts of questions that kind of remove the stakes of your story. Having some ambiguity to your magic is fine, but having ambiguity around Resurrection specifically can be really frustrating for people like me, who want to have rules around Resurrection so that we know that there can still be stakes in the story. If Jon Snow's resurrection was foreshadowed at all, it wasn't foreshadowed very effectively. We all just kind of expected that Missandra would find a way to do it and would accomplish the task, and so we weren't all that worried about Jon Snow being dead. But the lack of effective foreshadowing isn't the only reason why I'm frustrated with Jon Snow's resurrection. I'm genuinely frustrated with it because I think that his death was meaningful and could have led to a more compelling story where we had a lot of interesting theories and discussions cropping up. Like, who else could be the prince who was promised if there was any truth to that prophecy? Is there somebody else out there who fits this bill besides Jon? Jon Snow also deserved his death, not because I agree with the people who killed him or because I think that killing him is the right thing to do, but because Jon lives in a grimdark setting. One of the key principles of a grimdark setting is that no good deed goes unpunished. And Jon Snow is a good, caring, and loving person who has had a lot of growth throughout the story, and he did something that we all knew was going to get him killed. It was well established that any sort of connection with wildlings was going to be suspicious, but fornicating with them especially was going to result in betrayal of his vows, and was definitely going to lead to him being killed one way or another. So Jon Snow deserved his death. He had it coming. Not because I agree with the fact that he was killed, but because the story set it up really well that his actions were going to kill him. Death was a natural consequence for what he did, and yet his death and resurrection didn't really have a huge impact. And it just kind of left me feeling, yeah, of course he's being brought back to life. I'm not shocked, I'm not surprised. I'm just a little disappointed that this is the route the story has taken. I may be in the minority on this, but I believe that if Jon Snow had stayed dead, had been killed, and remained that way, it would have been a much more interesting story, and there would have been a lot more compelling discussion around the story of Game of Thrones, as opposed to, yeah, Jon Snow's gonna be resurrected. Oh, Jon Snow was resurrected. Did the resurrection make sense? I guess. I mean, we kind of all guessed it was going to happen, but did the resurrection make the story better? I don't think so. So that was 5 examples of the resurrection trope. Now, a couple of those examples were uses of the resurrection trope that I actually enjoyed. A trope that I genuinely despise almost every time that I see it used in any story. I took some time to reflect on what it is about these examples that I like, and I came up with 3 ways that you can make sure your resurrections are effective and actually enhance a story as opposed to inhibit it. So let's talk a little bit about that. So those were 5 stories that featured resurrection, some of which I think had resurrection done very well. But let's talk about why I think those stories handled resurrection well. I came up with 3 reasons why I think resurrection works for those stories where it doesn't work in others. These are 3 things that you can do to ensure that resurrection in your story actually makes sense and isn't so tropey and obnoxious that it's going to ruin your setting. Look, I know a whole bunch of this video has been me being a downer, so I'm just trying to end on a positive note here. The first thing you can do to make sure that resurrection is working for your story as opposed to holding it back is ensure that there is a cost associated with resurrecting a character. Having a cost associated with resurrection can easily explain why they don't happen all the time. Maybe the cost is a literal gold value that somebody has to pay, or the cost is a task that they have to complete. And at World's End, the cost for resurrecting Jack Sparrow is monumental. It makes sense that not everybody is brought back from the locker because it is such a challenge to accomplish. The first giant chunk of the movie is spent trying to pay this cost, and there's a chance that even after they pay the first half of it and get to the locker, they can't come back. There's a couple of people who just don't make it off the ship, and once they fall into those waters, that's it for them. If you have a cost associated with resurrection, you can make it very apparent why sometimes characters just can't afford to pay that cost. And at World's End, it totally makes sense that they're not going to go back and try to bring everyone back who fell to the locker, because it's so much work and they're not worth it. And the next element that can make resurrection more likely to enhance the story and even raise the stakes as opposed to hindering it and making me roll my eyes every time a character dies is
rule. I touched on this a little bit, but rule is effectively just the rules by which your resurrection is governed. By establishing those rules clearly and ideally before you even have a resurrection take place, you ensure that there are still stakes in your story and you can create situations where I do feel fear because I know characters can't actually be resurrected in these scenarios. Buffy's a pretty good example of this. The rules around resurrection have been established throughout the show. We've seen plenty of people be resurrected. We know that it's possible. We know that it can be both easy and incredibly challenging, and in some cases just can't happen at all. Resurrection is an important aspect of the show, and so everybody kind of expected that there was a chance Buffy could be brought back to life. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, this is one of the things that Critical Role has done very poorly. The healing and resurrection in the show make next to no sense, even if you have watched Critical Role or even if you have played D&D or another TTRPG. The resurrection and healing rules just don't seem to make a whole lot of sense, and they seem to work when it's convenient and not work when it isn't, and I feel like they could have done a better job clarifying that and taking it as an opportunity to raise the stakes of the story by changing some things that viewers might have been used to. We all expected some characters to come back to life easily as they did in the show, but wouldn't it have been more impactful if the first death in the show or the first near death in the show occurred just in season 2 and we only had some close calls in the first one? I think that scene in season 2 would have been way more powerful as opposed to me just sitting there going, yeah, I mean, why is this different? This doesn't make any sense. So establishing those rules can make a huge difference for the future of any sort of media, whether it's a book or a show, a film, whatever the case may be. Having rules around resurrection makes a massive difference. And then my third and final attribute of successful resurrection in a story or setting is reason. Reason is effectively the reason why a character is being brought back to life. There needs to be a reason why this person has to be brought back when there are others who could have been who weren't. Show me why you're choosing this character to come back to life. Show me why them staying dead is a worse option for the story than them coming back to life. Like I mentioned with Harry Potter, yeah, it makes sense that Harry was resurrected and it was foreshadowed pretty well, but was there a really good reason for it? Or would the story have been better if Harry had been allowed to stay dead so that somebody else could come and take his place? Would that have been a more interesting story? And that takes me to another branch of reason, which means reason should also be, is it better for the story? Is the story more interesting if this character stays dead or is brought back to life? And most of the time, as with several of the examples that I listed, the story would have been more interesting if people had just stayed dead. In some cases, it may have been one of my favorite stories ever if some people had just stayed dead. Death is meant to have an impact not only on the reader or the viewer, but on the characters in the setting. And when you have a character brought back to life for no reason, it really eliminates that impact and makes things kind of bland at that point. So there you have it, my 3 core attributes of a successful resurrection: the cost, the rule, and the reason. If you have all of those in your resurrection, odds are it's going to be a pretty good one as opposed to some of the completely nonsensical resurrections that we see in a lot of media. Now let's head on back to my coffin so that I can sum this up and get back to being dead. So we discussed a lot today. Let's sum up really quickly before I get back to being dead. First, we talked about the origins of resurrection and discovered that it had been a theme in ancient Egypt from the cult of Osiris. The belief was that by following the same means by which Osiris was resurrected, you too could enjoy life beyond death. This was a popular theory because, well, who doesn't want to be resurrected? Who doesn't want a life beyond death? Who doesn't want a second chance? And who doesn't think it would be awesome to worship the Lord of the Underworld? That sounds pretty cool. Next, I talked about why resurrection sucks in stories. One of them being that it cheapens death, another that it removes stakes, and the final one being the fact that the audience has to beg the question, why did you resurrect this character while this one has to stay dead? Why did this character specifically get to be brought back? Did they really deserve it, and was this really the best choice for the story? Now, there are plenty of other reasons why resurrection holds back a story and hinders it as opposed to enhancing it, but those were the 3 core reasons I found that made resurrection just suck for most of the stories that I don't like, which feature it. And after that, I got to some examples of the resurrection trope being used. I provided you with examples of the resurrection trope that I like, such as At World's End or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as well as examples of the resurrection trope that I don't like, such as Tangled, Game of Thrones, and Harry Potter. And finally, just to make sure that I ended things on a positive note, besides the positive note of me being dead, I made sure to provide you with 3 different ways that you can ensure resurrection in your stories doesn't suck. I'm calling it the Kerr method: cost, rule, and reason. A cost must be paid in order for resurrection to take place, and there need to be rules around a resurrection, ideally established before resurrection takes place. And finally, there needs to be a reason why a resurrection is taking place for a particular character. Tell me why this character is being resurrected, and tell me why the story is better for it as opposed to being better without the character's resurrection. If the story can carry on without that character, there's a good chance the story is better off without them. And after all that, I came back into this room so that I can go back to being dead. It's what I do best. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video. I really appreciate it. If you would like to see another video from me, you can do so by clicking up here. And until next time, bye.
Finally.